we'll start with is we'll introduce ourselves and talk just a little bit about what we do and a little bit about why we think the field of genomics is so exciting and where it's going. Can you hear us without microphones? Is that loud enough? Okay, perfect. And then we're going to turn this into an AMA, Ask Me Anything. And really, that's, I mean, you can ask us anything, and as long as we aren't bound by proprietary reasons, we'll do our best to answer it. So I will, ladies first.
Great. Wow. So if this was in my living room, I'd probably have a couple of dogs around begging for attention, have a drink in my hand, a cup of coffee, right? So just imagine that. But this is a good opportunity to talk. One of the most important parts of my job is mentoring. So when Michelle and the City of Mason and Myriad Neuroscience gave me the opportunity to come back to Mason and talk, I jumped at the opportunity. I was with Assurex Health in some of those early years when we were growing very, very quickly. In fact, one of my coworkers literally had on her seat a car seatbelt. And she would say, strap yourself in and get ready because we're moving really fast, and we were, so it was fun. I now live in Denver. I'm with a hospital called National Jewish Health. Let me give you a little bit of background on it so that you can understand a little bit of my background. And as we talk about genomics, I really want to share with you how important it is to bring genomics to what they do at National Jewish Health. So long around, I used to say around the turn of the century, but now time has passed, and you guys will think that means the year 2000, right? So 1900s.
That's accurate.
In the United States, tuberculosis was rampant in the United States. And the scientific thinking at the time, they didn't realize it was a mycobacterium that lived in your lung. They thought that if you just moved up to the mountains and got fresh air, that you would be cured. So people all across the United States picked up everything they had and they moved to Colorado, up into the mountain air. They show up in Denver, and lo and behold, they're not cured of tuberculosis. And they spent all their money to get there, so now they're homeless and they're poor. So there's estimates that in the early 1900s, there was as many as 5,000 homeless people with tuberculosis on the streets of Denver, which is pretty astounding because Denver was not that big of a city at that point in time. So the Jewish community got together and with a very giving spirit said, we need to do something to help these people. And so they formed a nonprofit hospital which is now called National Jewish Health. It's had several names over the years. And they treated these people for free. National Jewish still treats everyone for free. They do accept insurance now. For a long time, they didn't even accept insurance. But they're a respiratory hospital. We specialize in immunology, pulmonology, and infectious disease. And so all of those things affect the lungs. I'll just go ahead and talk a little bit about what I said while I'm here.
But I should actually, so my mama would have slapped me because I did not introduce Dr. Gunselman, so my apologies.
That's
Dr.
okay.
Sandra Gunselman.
Sandra. I'm that one over there. You can tell.
We are alternate from our...
We are. So anyway, so just quickly, I'll let you know about genomics since I've already given that introduction. The current science methods for looking at tuberculosis and also non-tuberculosis mycobacterium. So there's an acronym NTM. If you have not heard of that, it's something you should learn. Tuberculosis is on the decline in the United States. You don't hear a lot about it. There's about 200 cases per year, and we have some treatments that work for it very well. Non-tuberculosis mycobacterium, on the other hand, there's over 200,000 cases a year in the United States, and it's at an 8% incline. So it's growing, it is harder to treat than tuberculosis, and it's a devastating disease. And this is something we specialize in at National Jewish Health. So the testing methodology currently to determine if you have tuberculosis and then if you have non-tuberculosis mycobacterium was invented back in the 1980s. That's that century before, right? And so you take some blood, you take sputum from the lungs of the patient, and you put it on a petri dish, and you grow it. And you think, okay, now I've found something that's grown. Now you take it and put it on another petri dish, and you grow it up, and then you try to determine what that little bug is that's growing. So there's over 60 different species of mycobacterium that are known to date. So as you can imagine, especially if you have a very rare mycobacterium, it might be 6 months before you're able to determine what you actually have. In the meantime, you're isolated, you really shouldn't go to work and expose other people. It affects the healthcare system, it affects your family, it affects your job and your work. There's a lot of implications for a system that's like that. Now, bring genomics in. We're now developing tests. Instead of having to do what's called a cell-based test, we can now look at genomics. Now we can take that same sputum from a patient and extract the DNA. And I know you all know what that is because you have got the great advantage of going to a school like this that not only has programs like this, but you learn a lot about DNA, which is new. It used to be you weren't until college or grad school before you even learned about DNA. You did a lot of the things you guys are just doing in high school, so you're very lucky. But now that we have these DNA-based tests, instead of a 6-month period for diagnosis, it could be as soon as 24, 48 hours or 72 hours. And now suddenly, instead of finding out if you've got one type of mycobacterium, all 60 can be tested exactly at the same time. And suddenly you've got a patient that you know what to do with them, you know which drugs to give them, and you can treat them right away before they get sicker. So it's a very, very exciting time in healthcare, and it's all because of genomics.
That's very cool. 6 months to a few days.
72 hours.
Right. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So my name is Neil Lamb, and I work at the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology, which is this really cool place in Huntsville, Alabama, about 6 hours down the road from here. And Hudson Alpha was started by two gentlemen, Jim Hudson and Lonnie McMillan, and they started it. They were both really successful entrepreneurs in their previous lives. So Jim Hudson had a biotech company that he had sold. Lonnie McMillan had a telecommunications technology company. And they came together because they were frustrated with how long it took for discoveries in a research lab to actually make their way into patient care. Whether that was a new diagnostic test, like we just talked about from Sandra, or a new way to think about therapy or treatment, or any new technology, it took an enormous amount of time. Scientists would do the work, they would write a research paper about it, and often that was the extent of it. It didn't get picked up by a company, it didn't get turned into a product. So they put together a group of private donors and about $60 million in private funding, and then another $60 million from the state of Alabama to match it, to build a nonprofit space where literally, elbow to elbow, you have researchers that are studying genomics, recruited from around the country, right next door, right at the same desk with people that run biotechnology companies. And the idea being that if you put these groups together and they eat lunch together and they walk down the hall and they stop at a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard and they chart out what they're working on, that you more quickly can move discovery into real-world application. So that's kind of the premise around the nonprofit Hudson Alpha. There are 14 genomic researchers that sequence DNA and analyze DNA for families with rare disease, for individuals with neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, for multiple different kinds of cancer. There's a whole agricultural group as well. But they are continually making discoveries about the changes, how changes in DNA impact health and disease. And then there are 40 biotech companies that are on our campus. And some of those are 2 people, and some of those are 100 people. And then there's a clinic on our campus staffed by a medical geneticist and clinic staff that sees families that have undiagnosed disease. You may know people who there's clearly something affecting their lives, but no test has given them a positive answer. They've been on what's called a diagnostic odyssey. They get a test, the test comes back negative. They wait, there's another test that's available, they take it, it comes back negative. And they just wait, circling, looking for an answer. For a number of those families, you may find answers if you sequence through their genomes. Look at their genetic information. So we have what was really the world's first clinic devoted to starting with the genome. We see patients who may have been on this odyssey for 2 or 3 decades, or they may be relatively young kids, and we will analyze their genome. And so far, in about 40% of the cases, 40% of those unknown cases, we've actually found answers in their genome. So you've got researchers, you've got companies, you've got a clinical space, and then I have the privilege of leading the educational team. So that means I've got a group of about 20 people that continually talk to the researchers and the companies about what's new in their field and figure out how we share that with students and with educators and how we create intern programs and other kind of opportunities to take that science more broadly. It's a pretty incredible place. Both of us work at places that are about changing the equation, that are about improving the lives of individuals that find themselves in incredibly challenging situations. And both of our organizations are on a fast path or empowered by the whole field of genomics. And Sandra, I don't know about you, but so I taught medical school at Emory before I came to Hudson Alpha. And so I came to the Institute about 12 years ago. So my last medical course that I taught was about a dozen years ago. And at that point, I was telling future physicians, in about 25 years, you're going to see the opportunity to sequence patients' genomes. In about 25 years. And it happened 6 years after I taught that last class. So I don't know about you, but I never envisioned we would be at this place. We're now looking at somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million human genomes that have been sequenced.
So it's funny you say that, Neil, because I met Neil several years ago when I worked at one of those biotech companies, Kairos Genetics, at Hudson Alpha. And it was a startup. And I very strongly have this memory of this conversation we had that next-gen sequencing that will sequence your genome was just coming on board, even just for the research field. And there were a group of us that sat around and we were developing this technology, and someone asked me, okay, Sandra, when do you think this is going to be ready to use on patients? When's it going to be ready for the clinic? And I went, oh, it's just not ready. It's going to be 5 or 10 years at a minimum before that technology is ready to be used. And it was the next year. It shows how wrong I was. You guys were talking in the earlier session about you failed, I failed. It was the next year that people started using it in the clinic. In fact, it was Howard Jacob, who is now at Hudson Alpha. He was at Medical College, Wisconsin at the time.
He's now actually at AbbVie in Chicago.
Oh, he is?
Yes.
Oh, I gotta follow that man around the country because he's always moving. But it is funny how fast it moves. So from the perspective of running a clinical laboratory, which is what I do for my career, I always use a rule of thumb, and I tell, the group we had here before, who was in that talk? Were a lot of you in that talk? Okay, so you talk to the bioinformaticists, the informatics people, the people that look at the data, the regulatory people. I used to drive Andrew Marshak crazy because he would develop, a pathway for us to look at our data with, and I would go, that's nice, because we just changed what we're gonna do. And you'd be like, what? I just finished this. And so about every 3 years, you can expect that you're gonna use a different type of equipment to run your data with. You can change the way you're gonna analyze and look at those results. So that's probably one of the most important things for you all to understand too, is the field moves so fast. So don't expect that you're gonna have a linear career, and don't expect that you're gonna have a linear job either, because it has got to change. So I had a really great mentor very early in my career, and I was young and dumb. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I liked science, right? I was a geek, and he said to me, there's nothing wrong, and I hope if this didn't come off right, let me explain it again, right? He said, there's nothing wrong with the horse you're on, Donnie. You're in a race, right? And but you have to know when to jump off of that horse onto the one next to you that's still moving. And so what that means is it's always going to change. And so you can't be stagnant. You've got to be willing to change, especially now. The person that told me that probably couldn't envision what technology has done for science today. You've always got to be learning, open to learning, and open to seeing what the next trend is, where things are going, what we can do next. Because the ultimate goal is the pursuit of knowledge, but there's something even more important behind that, right? And that's the patient. Because that's what we do all this for, is how can we help people? And so my goal is always, what is the next great thing I can do that's going to get that result to the patients faster? It's going to be a better result. Pharmaceutical companies can use it to develop better drugs. Physicians can use it to help their patients more. And then the patients get that benefit of it. And so that's, an important thing to remember is it's not going to be stagnant. It's very fast moving. But that's one of the reasons I love science so much. Because if I had to be in a job that I had to show up to work at the same time every day, my old boss is here. He can attest to this. If I just show up at work every single day at the same time and leave at the same time every day, I would be fired the first week that I did that. Science gives you this great career that every day is different. Every single day. And so some days you work really long hours because you've got an experiment, you have to finish it. Some days, you'll just work your 8 hours. And they're a little quieter, but you can read, you can do other things, but it's never different. It's always changing, always changing. And I think the group before talked a little bit about failing. And I wouldn't even call it failing, because you haven't failed. If you get a negative answer, that gave you an answer, right? It just wasn't the answer you thought you were going to get. And that's one of the most important characteristics that I see in successful scientists, is 9 times out of 10, when you run experiments, when you're doing discovery in something new, you're gonna fail. You're gonna get a negative answer. That didn't turn out the way I thought it was gonna turn out. Okay, I'm gonna go back and let me try something different. Maybe it's this answer, because some of the greatest discoveries in science have been what we would call failures. They weren't what the scientists that wrote the experiment thought it was going to be. And so the best scientists I've ever seen aren't necessarily the ones that have the highest grades and memorized a lot of things. They were the ones with tenacity. And when they came in and they got those 9 no's, they had the strength and the determination to get up the next day and go back in the lab and try that 10th time. And it was that 10th time that they got that answer that made a difference in science. So that's, that strength, don't let it put you down. You just got to keep doing it. Don't stop.
I think that speaks to the whole concept of grit and resilience.
Yeah.
That it's never handed to you on a silver platter, and there are things that are going to be really challenging, and when you get a curveball or when the work seems really difficult, how do you keep going? How do you just dig in and say, I'm just going to figure my way through this?
Yeah, I had a problem in a lab one time early in my career, and it took a year for us to figure out what was going wrong with what we
That
were
makes my
doing.
stomach hurt.
You should have lived it. It was hard. I'm pretty stubborn, and that one almost got me. But that's another reason why teamwork is important, because working with other people and working with teams, you can sort of help each other get through that. You can share ideas, but also just encourage each other to keep trying, not give up.
So let's flip the script. So you guys drive the agenda now. What kind of questions do you have? There are no stupid questions. I promise you there are no stupid questions. All right, so I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to jump here, and then we'll move our way, over here.
So as you guys said, the field moves really fast. You thought it would happen in 5 years, and it happened in 1. So in the next 5 to 10 years, when we're going to be going through education and joining the workforce, what changes do you see happening in the field?
Should I go first? You go
Sure,
first.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Since I threw the opening to you unexpectedly.
I'll break you.
I think you're going to see DNA data almost become ubiquitous. I think we're going to see, because the technology has now made it almost completely accessible, we're one technological change away from really bringing it down to a cost point that is almost negligible. And at the same time, we're building all the data sets and the tools that will allow us to look at all this genetic information and be able to say, oh, here are the 20 changes out of the 4 million changes in your genome. Here are the 24 that we need to pay attention to. And yep, we've seen those before. We can say that's benign, that's part of natural variation. Here's what we need to be focused on. Within the next 5 years, I think we're going to get close to that if we're not going to hit that. So that means the use of genomic information in making healthcare decisions, in looking at predicting information about risk of disease, in our use of agriculture, and certainly in our use of infectious disease, genomics is going to become ubiquitous. Which means we have to know, just because it's there, doesn't mean it makes sense for us to use it. And so when do we appropriately say, yep, it makes sense for me to have this genetic test, or yes, it makes sense for me to look at this genomic information, or no, this is really driven primarily by the environment and by these other risk factors. So the genomic information, it's nice, but it isn't what I need to be basing my decisions on. So I think we are stepping into a world that will have genomics almost everywhere with enough data behind it to make real decisions. And now it's, what do we do with that?
Yeah. And I think I would add to that just a little bit, where it's not only the individual, because really we're talking about personalized medicine, where a baby is born and a genetic test is done and they have a profile that can follow them all their life. But also when it comes to use of that genetic data for pharmaceutical companies, now instead of a very regimented, non-personal therapy that you get if you have cancer, if you have, a cardiac disease or neurology disease, the pharmaceutical companies are now able to use this ubiquitous DNA data in populations and also on an individual basis to come up with a therapy that's personalized just for you. And that's huge. One of the things we do at National Jewish is we work on clinical trials. And it's kind of fun and challenging, but it gives us a little bit of an insight of what pharmaceutical companies are thinking about that. So there's all sorts of exciting new things that are coming, and they're all based upon genomics.
And you didn't ask this question, but let's talk about what comes after that. Because I think that's also really cool. And so your genomics gives you a set of information. It gives you some really valuable information about kind of the roadmap for you. But it doesn't tell you about your current health at this moment. And how that may have changed over the last 6 months or over the last 30 days. So I think where the field is really beginning to try to think about moving towards is biomarkers. It's this concept of whether it's a blood sample or a saliva sample or a urine sample, looking at the metabolites in my system and being able to say, oh, this looks out of whack. This seems to be characteristic of X, Y, or Z. Increasing risk of type 2 diabetes or metabolic syndrome, or your immune system seems to be moving into a pre-disease state. So that's not waiting until you've got symptoms, that's catching it ahead of time. So you can imagine that a big part of your healthcare in the future has to do with your morning routine in your bathroom. So hang with me a second. You get up in the morning and you go into the bathroom, and there are things that you do in the bathroom, and then and so you could imagine that we may have, again, hang with me, smart toilets that can detect the metabolites that are present in your urine or in your feces and can say, oh look, this seems out of whack. Or you spit into a device, a medical device that sits on your countertop, or you breathe into something, and it is now taking this information, analyzing it, and sending it to your physician real time. So you are getting a sense of what's actually going on in your body right now before you develop symptoms. That sounds like science fiction, but so did saying we're going to sequence your genome. So that, I think, is, a decade
Absolutely.
out.
Absolutely, and the microbiome.
Oh my gosh.
How important
Yeah.
that is. So what your digestive tract looks like, what's living in your digestive tract.
What are we putting in our body that
What are we
impacts
putting in
that?
our bodies? So it's one thing to have the genetics, it's another how it interacts with our bodies on an individual basis.
That
You guys
was
are
a
gonna have a
really
lot of fun.
long answer to that question.
We won't do as much.
Yep.
What do you think the commercial viability of CRISPR, genetic modification technology is? And if so, if you think it's viable, how long until it actually becomes viability tested?
CRISPR. CRISPR is genetic editing. This is a huge oversimplification. Some of you heard me say this first thing this morning. It is the genetic equivalent of find and replace in your word processing. It's a set of enzymes that came out of a bacterial defense system that recognizes a specific piece of DNA that you give it ahead of time. It finds that DNA in the genome, and then depending on how you've modified the system, it cuts it, it changes it, it edits it, it blocks it from happening. It is a set of molecular scissors, or maybe a better analogy is a Swiss Army knife. So we've known about some forms of these kinds of gene editing tools for several years, but only really in the last 5 has CRISPR really kind of exploded as the one. You asked about commercial viability. The first CRISPR-based food product is already on the market. It's a soybean that's modified. It has 2 CRISPR-edited modifications that prevents the formation of trans fats. It has a longer shelf life, and when it fries, it's actually healthier for you. So it now started 2 months ago, February, it started being used in restaurants in the Midwest. It took 15 months to bring to market, as opposed to a genetically modified organism, a GMO, which would have taken 5 to 7 years to come to market because of the tools and because the U.S. Department of Agriculture has said they're going to regulate it differently than they regulate GMOs. All right, so back to your question, commercial viability. That is the bandwagon everyone is jumping on. There are human health companies, there are agriculture companies, there are infectious disease companies that are looking at CRISPR. I think we are going to see it as the next major change, the next major wave of how we modify our genome. It generally leaves no trace behind. It is indistinguishable from a naturally occurring mutation. There are going to be some IP issues around who owns the patent and who pays what. And those are still, I think, being debated in the courts. But because the U.S. Department of Agriculture has already said they're going to regulate it no different than any other food product, that automatically opens that pathway. Now the challenge is, when we talk about, that's for crops. When we talk about livestock, that pathway is even more challenging than it was. And so there are a number of U.S. companies that want to do CRISPR in livestock to increase marbling in calves, or decrease the risk of a certain infection in sheep. And they're leaving the United States and going to Europe because the regulatory climate is so difficult here. Human health, we're in clinical trials for CRISPR. And I think we'll begin to see evidence. The concern about that is something called off-targeting, which is, am I finding and replacing something that wasn't exactly what I was looking for? So am I finding a DNA sequence that's really similar over here and also editing it? So what are those off-target issues? There are ways you can modify that by slightly altering the proteins that you're using. But the challenge is I need to globally search through my entire genome to make sure I only changed what I wanted to change and not everything else. So it is still, there are still some pretty big question marks around that. Not to mention the ethics of that. You may remember back in November the Chinese firm that gene edited the human babies, the human embryos, to prevent them. They made modifications in a gene called CCR5 to prevent them from being infected with HIV. And it caused enormous turmoil and uproar and ethical issues. So the use in humans that introduces long-term change, especially in our egg and sperm cells that are passed on, is still very much an open question. Sorry, that was like fire hydrant.
That was good.
I'm really excited about CRISPR. I think it's just amazing, and my head spins at how rapidly it has made its way into so many different areas of the industry.
Yeah, I can't add to that at all. You know a lot more about it than I do. That's for sure. Go ahead.
There was somebody,
There's one
yes,
right
yeah.
So you mentioned personalized medicine. So how possible do you think it is to incorporate AI? Or just like how quickly do you think AI would be incorporated into our everyday life in medicine?
Oh, wow. You know, a lot of it depends upon your definition of AI. I would say it's already there. We call it, in my world at least, bioinformatics and machine learning, but certainly it's there. And that's where we are taking individuals learning about them. There are cancer patients now that have an individual therapy developed for them and for their cancer based upon AI and how that's done. But it's already here, and I think it's just continuing to grow very, very quickly. There is a lot of IP around that as well too, and that's where the courts will have to, fight it out. But it's interesting. Everywhere I go, I hear people talk about AI in our lives, and even in every aspect of what we do. People are talking about it, not just medicine. So it's pretty amazing. What do you say, Neil? What's your thoughts on how AI is going to be used?
I see a lot of it in pattern recognition. When you analyze the genome of a patient with cancer, you may be looking at tens of thousands of mutations in those cancer cells, and only a dozen of them actually are drivers of cancer. So how do you distinguish those that you need to pay attention to? When you start looking at that kind of data, you are now trying to identify the patterns. The human brain is really good at that, but at some point there's so much information that we need AI to take to really step into that.
A little bit of job advice here, career advice. If you have any interest at all whatsoever in AI, in informatics, that is a career that is exploding. When I go to conferences, they always have these big boards, with jobs that are posted, and there's 2 jobs. It's the only ones that are posted now, and there's so...
You mean 2 categories?
2 categories.
Not just 2 jobs.
Not just 2 jobs, that's right, correct. 2 categories, and they're overlapping. There's so many people looking for these. It's a genetic counselor, and it's informatics, bioinformatics, informatics, whatever you want to call it, AI, bioinformation engineer, they call it. But those are the 2 jobs that there's not enough people in the field right now, and it's only going to continue to explode because it used to be these jobs, especially genetic counselors, were for very specific hospitals to talk to patients. Now biotech companies have to have them, food companies have to have them, almost every company that has overlapped into almost all careers. So it's something to take a good hard look at. It's an exciting career. You can probably go wherever you want and ask for, just about whatever you want to get paid for because there's just not enough. And I don't think that I see the end of that anytime soon, especially the way we're learning new things and we need new things.
And certainly the genetic counselor career is a master's degree and a certification exam. The bioinformatics in some cases is with a bachelor's, in other cases with a master's or a PhD. Knowing computer code, especially script like Perl and Python, those are really valuable tools in the bioinformatics world. If you've got an interest in that, that will set you apart from everyone else that's applying for those same sets of jobs. Other questions? Here, and then we'll go here.
So you both mentioned something about cancer. So do you think that genomics will be the answer or like the cure to like being able to diagnose and like maybe stop cancer in like patients who already have it? Is that like, do you think it'll be the answer to that?
I certainly think so. I mean, I feel like biology and the human body especially, we think we know this much, and we really probably only know about this much. I think sometimes, Mother Nature, biology has a good laugh at us when we go to conferences and talk about how much we know and how smart we are, and always brings a little surprise in for us. But certainly the knowledge is growing, and with cancer especially, there's a very large knowledge base of mutations, and we know what they mean. We've run clinical trials, so over a matter of time, we've been able to learn a lot about them. And certainly as a disease, cancer is the farthest along for diagnostics. When it comes to therapies that also can treat them, I would say that that's the same thing. Would you agree with that as well too? And certainly there's been tremendous changes. It used to be, cancer was sort of, a death diagnosis, death sentence. And now we see cures all the time, even people with stage 4 cancer, whereas before we would just say, let's make them comfortable. The one cancer that continues to be very difficult and has a lot of mystery around it is pancreatic cancer. But believe it or not, in about a month, there's a company in Sweden who thinks that they found an answer to that. And they're actually coming over to the United States, and I'm going to give opportunity to talk to them and learn about it. But cancer's, I think, certainly has the most promise.
I would agree with that. I'm a little hesitant to use the cure word with cancer. I think cancer is something that we are rapidly moving towards a disease that we live with instead of a disease that we die from. It is a genetic disease at its heart. Most of it's not inherited. Most of it we acquire because our cells gain mutations every time they divide. And if those mutations occur in key regulatory genes that control cell growth, then we can move from a typical growing set of cells to cancer. I think the challenge for cancer is because those cells, even when you have a fully formed cancer, when those cells divide, and they're dividing rapidly, they are acquiring even new mutations. So at any point in time, if I take a biopsy and I look at the genetics of that biopsy, 6 months down the road, I have a new set of mutations that has occurred in any cells that have survived. And I think that's part of why we see cancer recurrence months or even years after we thought the cancer was gone, because there are some small cancer cells that still remain that now have a new set of mutations. So it is this continual arms race between cancer and the physicians. The cancer acquires new mutations. It's evolution. The cancer acquires new mutations, and some of those new mutations, by chance, give it a selective advantage over whatever therapy we put in front of it. So the therapy kills most of the cells, but those cells with the new mutation actually survive and they thrive. So we are always looking for new tools in our arsenal based on our understanding. But so I don't know that we will ever get to a point where we vanquish cancer and we never see it, but I think we'll have a large enough set of tools that we'll be able to know what to do, and we'll be able to monitor that cancer even when, to the naked eye, it looks like there's none left. Yes?
This is kind of a weird question, but
We like weird questions.
so how is the kind of environment in your field? Like, is it very competitive, or is it kind of most of the companies are working together? And how do you resolve like problems with patents and who did what and all that?
So there's a fair degree of collaboration among the 40 companies that are at Hudson Alpha and the biotech, the researchers that are there. But we don't ask everybody to just open up their intellectual property and freely share that. So we've actually got a couple of companies that are working in roughly the same space, but doing it along different tracks. They're comfortable with that. They actually often talk to each other about that. So the Institute, Hudson Alpha is built around openness and engagement. There's lots and lots of glass. You can take there are no naps in our building because there are no spaces to hide in. Or at least everybody knows when you're taking a nap. And there's a sense of openness. So many companies might not choose to come to Hudson Alpha because of that. So there's much less of a, this is mine and I'm going to hold this back. It's an ecosystem of mutual benefit. And I think for us, that works well all the way around.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I would say there's some of both. And it depends upon the type of company and sometimes the leadership and sometimes just their business strategy, whether they keep things quiet or not. It is competitive, but that's not necessarily a negative. Sometimes, competition makes us better, right? But you do have to move fast, and it is just a decision based upon the type of group that you're working with, whether you keep things quiet. We call it a submarine, where you're working on some projects, you've got some new invention, and you keep it quiet until you're ready to sort of surface and go out, right, and take the market. I think oncology is probably one of the most competitive markets in healthcare. I call it, there's not a lot left to do in oncology, which is not true. It's not fair for me to say that, but I always say there's not a lot left to do except for you to figure out how to steal customers from, your competitors.
That was the bell.
That was the bell. Okay, so we talked a lot. Hey, one quick thing. Do I have 1 minute?
If you make it fast.
I'll make it really fast. One thing I wanted to say for the last one, there was a question about what do you look for when you're interviewing people. And I love the answer about looking for character, because that's certainly something I look for as well too. The best advice that I really want to hear, or I really want to have the opportunity to give you, is patience. So when you start a job, don't expect that every 6 months, no matter how good you are, and you know a lot more, and that's why you were hired, that every 6 months you're going to get a promotion, or even a year, suddenly people are going to start reporting to you. Science especially takes a really long time to really advance in it. And that's not to discourage you from it. It's definitely worth it. But just because the way budgets are written, just because of the way the business works, the best thing you can do is just get in and work hard and have a really positive attitude and know that you're being seen. Know that management, the boss, knows how good of a job that you're doing. And when that time comes that there's an opening, they're going to keep you in mind. That's probably the biggest frustration I see in a lot of young people that work for me, is just not understanding that you can't always have advancements,
It takes time.
It does.
It takes time.
It really does. So just be patient and keep working hard, and you will advance.
All right. Thanks, guys.